Okay, hi everyone. My name is Sanjina. I'm from the Global Shapers Kolkata Hub, and after a lot of, struggles, because back to back, there's been, of course, there's COVID, and then there's the cyclone that West Bengal experienced. Um, we had a lot of disruptions in our internet connectivity, which is why we had to postpone this. Webinar. So finally, we are doing it, and thank you all of you guys who are joining us for this great session. So because we have a lot of speakers lined up today, including our first panel and second panel, I don't want to waste much time and just get into this. So we have the first part of the panel. We are going to discuss entirely all about menstrual disorder, menstruation, and its impact on mental health. And the second panel, we will have our shapers from the shaper community across various hubs joining us and talking about their experiences in terms of menstrual health, menstrual management, and mental health, etc., etc. So I will be moderating the first part of the panel, and the second part of the panel will be moderated by my fellow shaper from my hub, Purvi. Let's start the first part. Okay, we'll break for questions in between the two panel discussions, which is when we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. So while we talk, we request all of you to please put down your questions in the chat box, and we'll see how we can get our experts and panelists to answer these questions as much as possible. So, okay, so we have five panelists with us at this moment. Four panelists with us at this moment. I would first want to introduce Dr. Sagarika Basu. After completing her MBBS, Dr. Basu pursued her postgraduate in obstetrics and gynecology in the UK. She completed her MRCOG and worked as a consultant in ONG with special interest in fertility. After working for almost 13 years in the UK, she has relocated to India and has been serving at the Fortis hospitals in Calcutta since then. We are also next joined by uh, Dr. Natasha Kate. Quickly, some words about Dr. Kate. Dr. Natasha Kate is an MD DNB Gold medalist and is a member of the prestigious Royal College of Psychiatry, UK. She has authored a number of international and national articles, research papers, book chapters related to child mental health. She has also received the Michelle Hong Fellowship by the Asian Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, as well as World Psychiatric Association's Young Psychiatrist Award in Berlin. Um, then we have uh, Swarnima Bhattacharya, who is the founder of Kia Care, a virtual health coaching and consultation platform for women, and the curator of FemCon, a women's health festival. She is a Women Deliver alumni and serves as the advisory board of Dove's Self Esteem Project. And we have also Dinaz with us. Dinaz Gigi Boy was awarded the National Scholarship for Achievement at the BSc level in the University of Calcutta to pursue her MSc in Psychology. She was also the recipient of the Devarpita Mukhopadhyay Book Prize for 2003 for topping her BSc examination, and the G. Bose Memorial Prize in 2002 awarded by the Department of Psychology, University of Calcutta. She has represented a lot of scientific papers at seminars and conferences and awarded the best paper, S.C. Gupta Best Paper Award in 2015. She is currently interested in narrative ideas and practices and its application in clinical settings. She is actively associated with the multiple NGOs that works for children and upliftment of women. She an avid sportswoman. She continues to play basketball at the club level, and she also trains Bulbuls, a section of the Bharat Scouts and Guides. So, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. And I think let me start the session with Dr. Shagorika Basu. And just Dr. Basu, if you could tell us, so the entire idea of of doing this webinar is to discuss menstruation, some menstrual disorders, and conditions like PMS, PMDD, PME, and how it impacts not just the physiological but also the mental health of the person who is experiencing this, of the menstruator in this case. So, Dr. Basu, if you could just take us through the entire spectrum of these disorders, like how does one identify PMS? How do we get into the diagnosis and treatment of conditions like PMDD, PME? How does one even identify? Because in a country like India, or like a setup like our country, I don't think a lot of women or a lot of menstruators, for that matter, are even aware of such conditions existing. So, if you could just help us understand it.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for including me in this great topic. Sanjina, special thanks to you. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about PMD, or poor premenstrual disorder. So PMS, or premenstrual syndrome, it is actually a combination of psychological symptoms and some physical symptoms. So out of the psychological symptoms, mainly we come across depression, anxiety, loss of confidence, etc. And physical symptoms are bloatedness and nostalgia. Now, how typically these symptoms present is they typically present premenstrually, and the symptoms should alleviate with the onset of menstruation. So that is what is actually a PMS. Always and always the main criteria is it should predate the menstruation. How common it is fairly common. About 40% of women do experience some symptoms of PMS, and about 5%, 5 to 8% do experience severe PMS. Having said that, it's quite a common problem in women. As a gynecologist, I have very seldomly come across women who come or walk to the clinic and complain about these symptoms, especially after coming back to India. As Sanjina was mentioning, that I have worked in UK for 13 years, and I have seen quite a few cases of premenstrual syndrome, or PMDD, in UK. I have come back to India and practicing for the last 1.5 years, and I have not seen a single patient in India so far. It is hard to believe that women in India do not have this problem, they do not have this disease or disorder. But what I think is there is lack of awareness, and there is lack of openness from the women's part, maybe social stigma. And I have really not seen many women coming to me and talking openly about menstruation or any problems related to menstruation, contraception, etc., which are so, as we all know, which are so important in a woman's life. So it is a fairly common problem, but it is a very commonly reported, so to say. So what is PMDD, premenstrual dysmorphic disorder? So as I said, that it's a combination of symptoms, and it is like one of the, it is actually this PMS or PMD is a spectrum, and it has got, it can be classified into PMDD, premenstrual exacerbation of any underlying condition, PMS, etc., or premenstrual syndrome. How do we diagnose PMS? Once a woman comes and talks about symptoms which we think that can be related to premenstrual syndrome, it is always recommended that we diagnose this problem in a prospective manner rather than in retrospective manner. So what does that mean? That we give them a menstrual diary and ask them to record their symptoms in the next 2 or 3 cycles. So starting like they will start writing down the symptoms from the day it starts, and they will record it, the severity, and then if it shows that yes, it is getting relieved with the onset of menstruation, etc., the diagnostic criteria, then we do diagnose it in that way. Another way of confirming the diagnosis is once you have got enough evidence from the prospective reporting or history taking, and you want to do a confirmatory test, sometimes we do give them a couple of months injections of gonadotropin releasing hormones. And if those symptoms disappear or are cured with the injection, we can confirm that yes, that is a premenstrual syndrome. Okay, so that is the diagnosis part.
Treatment depends a lot on the severity of symptoms. So if it is mild premenstrual symptom, mild means that maybe mild
Shagurikadi, I think the network is a little disrupted, so we don't mind you. If you want to uh, put your video on hold and just continue with the audio.
Okay. Okay.
Shagurikadi, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Ha, better.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So treatment of premenstrual syndrome depends a lot on the severity of the symptoms. So if it is mild PMS, where the symptoms like bloatedness or mastalgia, means breast pain, anxiety, depression, mood swings, these are present but not in very severe form, it has not affected the quality in the and reassurance of mild PMS. As we move on to more severe symptoms, where
Can you hear me, Sanjina? So where can you hear me?
Your voice is a little broken, and I can hear you sometime. Then you are.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Now, if the symptoms are severe enough to disrupt the quality of life, then we start treating them. So treatment always has to be in a multidisciplinary team, which will include a gynecologist, a psychologist or a psychiatrist, a nutritionist, some like a team like that. Okay. Now I'll talk about my part, like the gynecologist part. What we usually do is we start off, the first line treatment is combined oral contraceptive pill, which includes a progestin called drospirenone. So it's a type of OCP, contraceptive pill. Not all the OCPs are recommended in PMS, but the first line has always got to be the contraceptive pill with addition of antidepressants if the symptoms are severe enough.
Right.
Now, what is the second line? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, can
Saurgati,
you hear?
we are running a
Yeah,
little
okay.
short of time, so if you can wrap up a little bit, and then we can come back to you when I mean once all of the
Sure.
panelists have
So
spoken.
second line, yeah. So once you have tried the combined contraceptive pills, if that doesn't work, then move on to transdermal estradiol and progesterone combination with a higher dose of antidepressants, combining it with CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. And if that doesn't work, then injections of gonadotropin releasing hormones for like with Advac, HRT, etc. And if the medical treatment, that is with like with medicines, that does not work, then the last resort is surgery. And surgery should include hysterectomy with removal of both the ovary. Okay, so that is the line of treatment. Obviously, we would not recommend somebody surgery in the first place. We would try all the other methods first of all, and then if we see that, yes, that is definitely not going away, not helping with any other symptoms, then only surgery is recommended. Yeah, Sanjana, I think that is.
Yeah. So thank you, Shagorika Di. I think let's pause here with on these topics and move on to the next speaker, and then we can, of course, people whoever has questions and wants to know more detail, we can we'll be anyway sharing email addresses and contact details of all our panelists, and you can we'll try to answer questions over here as well. So I will move on to Dr. Natasha Kate at this moment, and whereas Dr. Basu almost spoke about the process and the disorder and the treatment quite a lot. I think you and I have discussed quite often about the different presentations of PMDD, PME, and PMS. What happens to people who already have some existing mental health conditions, and then so on and so forth. And if you have any experience of dealing with menstruators with such issues.
Right. So again, it's a great opportunity to talk about something we don't get a chance to talk about, at least in a forum like this. I think as a psychiatrist, my experience in seeing people with PMDD as a diagnostic criteria disorder and PME, premenstrual exacerbation of mental health problems, is quite common. So obviously, I'm not saying that I'm seeing patients with PMDD every day, but at least once or twice in a month, we get people who come to us with very clear concerns about the premenstrual phase. Many of these are working women, so they find that there is a an impairment in their attention. They are not as put together during meetings as they are otherwise at other points of time. They feel low, they have a lot of physical symptoms, and they have often identified it themselves, and they come to us. The other group of people are the people who haven't really picked that up, but can definitely identify certain mental health concerns. I'd just like to point out here that for a diagnosis of PMDD, you require to have at least one psychological symptom and the other behavioral cognitive symptom. So generally, these are the type of symptoms that are mandatory for the diagnosis as per a diagnostic criteria. So they possibly, therefore, show themselves more commonly to psychiatrists as compared to possibly a gynecologist. Now, as per the data that is there, around 40% of people who come who come to you would have around PME type picture. So for a lot of women with known mental health problems, around 40% of them tend to have some exacerbations of their mental health symptoms in the premenstrual period. So this is much more common with those who have depressive and anxiety disorders, relatively less common with those who have psychosis or something, other mental health problems, but it is quite common. And I think what happens is a lot of women tend to dismiss their symptoms and say that, okay, this is common, this is not a big deal. Mummy ne kaha tha ki, periods ke time pe, chidchide ho jate hai. And they don't give it the importance that it requires. We are seeing, like I said, professionals coming in because it's really impacting their day-to-day life, and they want to be judged upon their skill sets and not their emotional state in the professional setting. this is something we are beginning to see. I think I've mentioned to you once also that we've had a person who's attempted suicide on 2 occasions, and both were in the premenstrual period. And she had, and when we went back, so when we went back and talked and assessed her history, there it was a very clear pattern that came in, that there is a strong premenstrual uh, deterioration in her mental health, and where she did not have symptoms for the rest of her period cycle, but they often came in approximately 7 to 10 days before her periods began, which she had a significant dip in her mental health, and that associated with certain other stressors in her life, caused her to attempt suicide on 2 occasions, and she somehow survived the second attempt, which I think was, very lucky. But after that, when we've had made a diagnosis and we are working with it, things are much better. A lot of women, when they don't understand that they do experience PMDD or even PME for that matter, it's a feeling that is quite scary because suddenly things spiral out of control. Let us assume you have a mental health problem, you have anxiety, you're taking treatment, you're working on it, and suddenly, for no reason that you can understand, things are getting worse. It's quite scary, it can be very overwhelming, and we don't understand the impact that hormonal cycles play on the woman's physiology and the physiology of the brain, and why the deterioration happens. So there is some research that is associated with certain body hormones called allopregnanolone, which is related to progesterone, which is part of the menstrual cycle, which plays a role. But all in all said, I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is a problem which is having major psychological impact. The other thing we often see, and I think we've again had this brief conversation about how PMDD symptoms often worsen with age. So there is some literature available on that, especially as women come closer to menopause, often PMDD symptoms can be at their worst. And sometimes they have perimenopausal symptoms. So the mix together can be very difficult for a woman to deal with. So I think when we talk about presentations of this, we should remember that there is no one size fits all. One woman may have a lot of irritability, the other one may have a lot of crying spells. Someone may have a lot of physical symptoms of bloating, mastalgia. Someone else may just have difficulties with fatigue and loss of concentration. And because the patterns are different, and therefore the impact on a woman's life is different, even two women with the exact same symptoms, because they lead different lives, will have a differential impact. Therefore, it's not so easy to pick up and diagnose, even if women talk among themselves. I'd just like to mention, if I may, Sanjana, that whenever we label, so there's been a huge controversy on PMDD, and there was a lot of discussion even before introducing it in standard diagnostic guidelines. Okay, this will label women, and this is just another big deal. PMS happens, and we are making too big a deal out of it. But the fact that that this is a problem helps a lot of women use things that are not medications also to get control back in their life. For example, if you know that this is a problem that you have, that you do develop certain symptoms during a particular time of month, you can also learn to organize your life around it. Don't plan a major meeting, don't plan a major decision around the time when you know you're not going to be emotionally at your healthiest. I think we talk a lot also about nutritional supplements. For a lot of women, they do not want to take medications for what they perceive a natural process, right? And it's not about whether or not this is pathological or not. It's a person's own choice on what they're comfortable in terms of treatment. So we often talk about omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, magnesium supplementation, the role of diet in general and exercise in helping. And there is a lot of research that says that this is helpful. It isn't just general advice we give. There's a lot of research that says that this is helpful. And yes, what Madam has pointed out right now, that we do look at medications in some people who have severe symptoms. I think while oral contraceptive pills are given throughout the month, with regards to antidepressants, there are two types of dosing strategies we look at. One is a continuous one, and one is what we call a luteal phase alone medication. That means it's given only in the second half or when the symptoms are more. And interestingly, we see this in clinical practice, and it's also there in literature, that a person, the impact of the antidepressant may not happen on the depression, but may happen on the PMS or the PMDD symptoms. So the way the antidepressant works for a person with PMS, PMDD is different from the way it works for a person with a mental health problem. So I think that also highlights the fact that this is not just depression, or this is not just something that is bada chadha ke bola gaya hai at that point of time. There are different ways it acts, and therefore we can have this kind of differential dosing, that patterns that we plan.
Thank you so much. That's so informative. We'll again take questions after every speaker has spoken. So I'll quickly move to Dr. Dinaj. So you have been practicing in you as a psychotherapist, a psychologist in Calcutta for some time now. And I think when we spoke also, we discussed that how, again, as Dr. Basu had also mentioned, that there hasn't been much awareness about it, and they don't, people don't will never come up to you and tell you that, okay, I have a condition like PMDD, PME, or acute PMS for that matter, because we're constantly told that it's something that we are making up, or something that we are overacting, or overreacting to all of this. So if you could take us through what your experience has been, and what you think about such conditions, and how it impacts a menstruator's mental health as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjana. Good evening to everyone, and of course, thank you for having me here to speak about the overlooked condition that can trigger extreme behavior. So what I would be talking about and focusing upon is my experiences in therapy, where clients coming in do not come with direct concerns of PMDD, PMS, or PME, but how the unfolding takes place within the therapy space, how the symptoms may exacerbate closer to menstruation without being noticed. I would like to explain this with two case examples out of quite a few that I have come across, and then proceed to speak a little bit on stigma and acceptance. So as a 36-year-old, PS was a busy woman. She was working from home as a freelancer, taking a course to enhance her skills, homemaker to a 4-year-old, and a 4-year-old, and mother to a 4-year-old. She experienced intense anxiety when she came across anything to do with cancer. Now, on further exploration, it was observed that these fears started when she lost 4 of her family members to the dreadful disease back to back. She found herself having panic attacks, was preoccupied not only with her health, but with the health of her family as well, insisting that every member of the family go for extensive health checkups every month. She would flare up if anyone tried to show her real reason, and would feel irritable and angry at the slightest of reasons, and at other times she would feel very sad and tearful. She was extra vigilant to anything that had to do with illness, especially cancer. This was, she was feeling very overwhelmed with all of these, and she was feeling out of control. This was affecting her interpersonal relationships extensively. Now, the second case is about a 25-year-old individual who was suffering from a chronic and disabling combination of emotional, cognitive, and behavioral psychiatric symptoms such as instability, unstable moods, reactive, uncontrolled anger, frequent feelings of emptiness, turbulence in interpersonal relationships, fear of abandonment, a tendency to become paranoid during times of stress. Damaging impulsive behaviors were also present. She reported self-injurious thoughts and sometimes behaviors. Now, in both the cases, we see that the psychiatric symptoms were the strongest, and CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy, was applied in the first case. It was quite effective as a treatment approach for mood and anxiety symptoms and helped her cope better. In the second case, in addition to the strategies of CBT, we worked with acceptance and change-oriented strategies. This also helped her to increase her emotional and cognitive regulation by learning about the triggers. Now, in this process, they were asked to observe themselves over a period of time to see that what are the triggers they can identify in their environment or within them that brings about the distress that they are experiencing. They were asked to record their experiences as minutely as possible with regards to the situation, the time of day, date, as well as their responses in the situation. Now, this was done with the aim of helping them to be consciously aware of the triggers. Along with this, calming down exercises just such as understanding one's process of breathing, mindfulness meditation, these were also explored. Now, it is in this phase during therapy that they observed that the symptoms such as anger, irritability, fluctuations in mood, sadness, tearfulness, anxiousness, feelings of emptiness, all these symptoms seem to increase in the week to 10 days before the onset of their menstrual cycle. Now, this is when they were psychoeducated regarding the possibilities that these symptoms may increase because of hormonal changes in the body as well. We then began to explore what are the things each of them witnessed during the phase. What they reported is that all of these symptoms basically increased, and it was basically becoming overwhelming and they were feeling out of control. When we could identify this, they said that, just this identification worked wonders for them. They felt much better knowing that why it is that sometimes they feel more horrible than other times. And this is where they were, like Dr. Kate was saying, that they were able to organize their work better. They began to be more mindful during the premenstrual phase, which led to a reduction in the anxiety of the symptoms that they reported. The symptoms were there, but at least the understanding of them reduced the intensity. So focusing on the cycle awareness in the context of social treatment, support and targeting of skills, all this in the therapeutic context, using problem and emotion focused coping basically helped them to improve symptom stability. Now, if we try to understand the broader aspect of why so many women may not even think that they can be emotionally affected during their menstrual cycle, is because for many, many centuries, the menstrual cycle has held negative connotations for women. It has been held as evidence for a generalized sense that, women were incompetent or stable, with the resultant exclusion of opportunities in education, employment, and positions of influence. Such views are no longer in the mainstream, we hope. Although there has been clear advancement of knowledge, we still find that majority of people are either being ignorant about it or are genuinely not aware about these symptoms. So in many places, we will still find that, there are separate areas of a house or a community which are reserved for menstruating females. They may not have contact with other people. They may not be allowed to prepare food, go into the kitchen, touch books, pray, due to the belief that menstruating females are impure. Countless girls miss school while menstruating. Both because of taboos and inability to access the feminine hygiene products. Now, we are all aware of the stigma associated with menstruation and really don't need to go into that much. But what we can focus upon is how do we stand up against this discrimination and reduce the stigma associated with it. So integration of menstrual health into programs for sexual and reproductive health and hygiene, holding awareness camps in rural areas, giving access to information, talking about it, having access to supplies, all this is very important. Needs are not being met, maybe because no one is talking about it. Let us stop addressing menses, by terms and phrases like her time of the month, chum, shark week. There are many slangs used. Let us not attempt to hide anything to do with it. For example, we still find that there are, when we are going to buy a pack of pads, people immediately start to wrap it with newspaper, put it in a plastic bag, that also black, as if in case, it may be visible through the newspaper. The advertisements which we see talk about un dino ke liye, and pour blue liquid all over the pad. Why? Why are these ads conforming to the taboo in society? Why are they created as if to comfort society? They use a blue gel. Why don't they use a red one? Perhaps, ads could start with referring to menstruation directly, without shame, without hesitation, not to dehumanize menstrual flow. Maybe depict a direct conversation, between mother and daughter, maybe involve the brother and father in the dialogue. All this would basically help the adolescent girl from being embarrassed about a normal physiological process that they undergo every month. So a woman is spending an average of about 2,280 days in her lifetime bleeding. So let us be instrumental in the changing the tone from that of shame and silence to acceptance and education. And it is a foundation of the human race. So let's not be ashamed, disgusted, or embarrassed about it. Period.
Thank you so much. I will move on to our next speaker now. And this is again, I think, if anybody has questions, please put it in our chat box and we'll get it answered. So I would like to invite Swarnima Bhattacharya. She's also a fellow shaper from Delhi Hub. And okay, yeah. Please put in your questions in the chat box. So Swarnima, if you could join us and take us through the entire. So we have also discussed earlier that how there has been a debate around PMDD or PME, whether it's a mental health condition or it's a gynecological condition. And I think you've reiterated and told me quite a lot of times that, Sanjana, the debate is rested. We have an answer. And why is it important that we move on from that debate so that the other aspects pertaining to these conditions, the experiences, the life experiences, culture and context around menstruators' life has to, has to be identified on, and it is only then that we can move ahead of this entire debate for that matter. So over to you, Swarnima.
Thank you, Sanjana. And before I start, I just want to congratulate the whole team for putting this together despite all that has been going on in Kolkata. So your team at the Kolkata Hub and the speakers who may be joining from Kolkata, thank you for doing this despite everything. Now, to answer your question, I just want to very briefly talk about the politics around PMS, PMDD, and menstruation and mental health in general. And when we were talking about this, earlier, I told you about, framing the conversation around menstruation and mental health and not just PMDD. The reason is that when we talk about women's health, whether physical, mental, whatever, what is essentially missing is a culture of care, which is why even when people don't have ailments such as PMDD, PCOS, endometriosis, even the normal, natural, so-called, these processes like menstruation, menopause, they become extremely uncomfortable, painful, and often traumatic for people. So when we talk about menstruation and mental health, it is not only the incidence of PMS and PMDD, but the fact that menstruation and its discomfort, talking about it is so taboo. PMS, hormones, these are things that are so vilified in conversation and so caricaturized more than anything else. A hormonal woman or a, menstruating, person, they're so caricaturized in popular culture. So talking about this discomfort, getting an acknowledgement of this discomfort is very difficult, which really adds to mental health issues, even if one does not fall on the PMS, PMDD spectrum. Secondly, another thing that, somebody before me spoke about, and I'll go a little deeper into it, is how, conversations around PMS and PMDD have been, pushed to the margins for a very long time. And, women themselves have played a role in this. There was a very famous psychologist, Dr. Robert Steen DeLuca, who wrote a book and an entire discourse called The Hormone Myth, where she spoke about how PMS is just a myth and it is just about, subjugating women and things like that. Now, so many women and so many feminists had also hailed this position because we were operating from a space of fear that if we acknowledge our hormonal nature, then we will be, we have already fought so many battles to be equally represented, to be seen as rational. Somehow, acknowledging PMS will pull our advocacy back. Now, here is what happens. There is this author who had Eleanor Morgan, who said that hormonal is the modern day hysterical. In the olden days, we used to say women are hysterical. Now we say women are hormonal, little knowing that actually women's hormones are one of the most easily trackable and alignable. Somebody spoke about how we can align our work activities and priorities according to where we are on our menstrual cycle. And men and other, non-binary individuals as well, we are all hormonal. It's not just about sex hormones or reproductive hormones. Our growth, hunger, tiredness, exhaustion, it's all to do with hormones. So situating the conversation of PMDD, PMS within the politics of hormones and how hormonal women are, vilified and caricaturized, that's very important. And another thing is that, there is one data that came from the International pelvic pain, the International Pelvic Pain Society, which estimates that 61% of women, who have pelvic pain during menstruation, they don't even know what is causing this pain. So this is the level of, lack of awareness and stigma around conversations, which increases mental health issues during menstruation. So even if a person does not have PMS, even if a person does not have PMDD, there is a mental toll that the difficult experience of menstruation often, brings about. Now, speaking of whether it's, this debate, this eternal debate of medical, whether it's gynecological, whether it's what. Now, another thing is that, we have to be very careful about calling PMDD a hormonal disorder, because AIPMD, which is the International Association for Premenstrual Disorders, has very clearly made a distinction that it is not a hormonal disorder, but PMDD is a sensitivity, a very high sensitivity to the natural fluctuations of estrogen and progesterone that generally happen in the luteal phase or in the post-ovulation phase of the menstrual cycle. So a lot of people, many times it is misdiagnosed as just a hormonal imbalance. Now, a lot of women and assigned female at birth individuals, they might not have, a hormonal imbalance, but they may have a very high sensitivity to it. And it has, in fact, the AIPMD has called PMDD a hormone sensitivity disorder in the brain. So this is also another research that's happening, that how the brain is connected because of the hypothalamic pituitary axis and, the relationship between estrogen and the brain and all of that. So, while it is a hormone-based disorder, calling it a hormonal disorder would imply that there is an imbalance in the hormones, which is not always true. Another thing that we must, keep in mind is, the difference between PMS and PMDD is not just the, intensity and severity of, the symptoms, but the fact that PMDD is actually classified as a mental illness in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, not before that, whereas PMS is not. And when it comes to this eternal debate, of course, it has been classified as a mental illness. So definitely it is, but now because of various changes in the way the gynecologists and obstetrician associations are working, gynecologists can also now diagnose PMDD. So yes, definitely it is a mood disorder. It manifests itself as a mood disorder. However, when people generally call PMS and PMDD a mental disorder, it is coming from a very different perspective. Not everyone is speaking about it from a rights-based perspective that, this has been characterized as a mental illness and therefore it needs the right kind of care or the right framework of care. So people just say, they equate it with madness, which is something that is done with most mental illnesses. And another thing is that what we have to keep in mind is that is PMDD that has been recognized in the DSM manual. It is not PMS. So PMS is not categorized as a mental illness, and there is a lot of, and like the doctors, before me said that, if you look at the symptoms of PMS, there are 150 symptoms that are officially listed as symptoms. And, sometimes, in our community, a lot of questions come to us, when doctor was, I think Dr. I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting her name. Sagarika, Dr. Sagarika was talking about how when she came to India, she has not treated a single. I completely can see that happening. I'll give you a small example. that if you do a study of Google search trends, and if you say that, how many women are searching something like endometriosis, you will see that the percentage is very less as compared to the number of women who actually have endometriosis in India. But if you search for symptoms of endometriosis, such as heavy periods, painful periods, fainting during periods, this Google search trend is extremely high. So women and other menstruators and assigned female at birth individuals, they often don't know that a particular symptom is corresponding to PMDD or something like this. So they search for the symptoms, and it is during a diagnostic process, it is while speaking to an expert, that it is diagnosed later that okay, this might be PMDD or it might be PMS or something like that. So that is what I would like to say about the debate. Like you rightly pointed out, that the debate has been restricted to a great extent. It requires an intersectional sort of a cure. A lot of people who have issues like PCOS and endometriosis, etc., they also have worsening PMS conditions in the luteal phase, but they may not all have PMDD, even though this discomfort might be characterized in the form of the mood and the mental situation. So this distinction has to be made, and it has been said very clearly that, and a lot of research is now being done, like I said, about the brain and the role of the brain. It's an ongoing field of research. It's a developing field of research. So I don't want to comment too much on that. But yeah, this very reductive, patriarchal, misogynist, essentializing debate about whether it is, hormonal, gynecological, blah, 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 it has been tested. It's, if you break your arm and your leg, that will also have a mental health repercussion. It's not just women's health issues that have a mental toll. So, yeah, so that's what I would like to say.
Thank you so much, Vanimati. I think we'll just quickly, we just have a couple of questions so far, and Mayuri, you can come in and just help us with the questions quickly so that we can move on to the second part of the webinar.
Yeah. So one of the questions that came is, are there organizations and government and information communication materials on these issues which can be used for communities during sessions? Basically, like if there are, like, where is the information that social workers they can use on these topics? Are there any kind of sources? Would any of the panelists take up this question?
Mayuri, if I may quickly respond to this, am I audible or am I muted suddenly?
No, you're audible.
Okay. So, as far as organizations are concerned, actually there is a lot of misinformation around PMS and PMDD. Often they are conflated just because they are premenstrual issues. So the one organization that I would definitely recommend is AIPMD, the International Association for Premenstrual Disorders. And they also, so their material is available in English, but many organizations, including ours, have undertaken translation work with AIPMD of their materials. So materials in Hindi, Bengali, Marathi, Gujarati, and some South Indian languages, I'm not sure which ones, they are already available. So please check that out, and they are very credible, evidence-based, and the information is being updated on a very regular basis.
Thank you so much. We have another question. It is about how are daily habits such as diet, physical activity, and stress being studied as factors to treat PMS. Would you like to? Would I repeat the question, or did you get that?
Yeah, I would like to comment on that. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yeah. It has been reported that, and it has lots of studies have shown that the daily like lifestyle and daily health has got an impact on the premenstrual health of women. So modifications of diet, including exercise in the general routine, and like reducing the stress related factors have a positive impact on premenstrual health. So it is highly recommended, and I mean we as doctors do recommend or do talk about these issues alongside prescribing medicines to improve the outcome of the treatment.
I think Dr. Natasha also has something. You have raised your hand. You're on mute. I think let me unmute you. Where are you? Yeah. Yeah. Did you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I've done
Yeah.
that. So I think I just want to add to something that Dr. Basu said, is that when we are looking at exercise, there is a scientific reason to that. Exercise causes the release of something called endogenous opioids and endorphins, which kind of offsets the impact of the hormonal changes in the brain. Even when it comes to nutrition, the role of omega-3 fatty acids that we talked about, vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, are all important for your brain to be able to regulate itself. Right? The brain has a lot of mechanisms by which it tries to self-regulate and get things back on track. But we need to give it the raw material it requires to be able to do that. And that's why this is important. Like I mentioned before, there is a lot of scientific research that is going into. There's something called randomized controlled trials that are looking at the role of exercise and some nutritional supplements in the management of PMDD and PMS. So I think these are important, and they're important for general health and also this condition.
Thank you so much. And there is a question. It is regarding overall health. It is about like, is menstrual cramp natural? How reasonable it is to take medication, and what are the health impacts of it? Would any one of you take up this one? And then I think we can move to the second session.
I think menstrual cramps are something that a lot of women experience. They are related to what the uterus does is when it tries to shed what we call the endometrium, the lining after the period cycle is over. There is the uterus cramps to help remove the endometrium more successfully. Some women have more severe cramps, some women have less severe cramps. It also depends on other factors like age, if there is something like a fibroid there. Sometimes it's just sensitivity of an individual is different, or the way an organ is slightly different in different people. I think it's important to realize that for it's because it is looked at and said, oh, this ye hota hai, a lot of women do not use pain relieving medications that can help them. A lot of women suffer in silence, and we have seen women having, fainting during menstruation, having something we call vasovagal syncopes, just because they think nahi dawa nahi leni chahiye, because this is a natural process. It's important to realize that a lot of things are natural processes. Like, for example, fever is a natural process to infection, but we still do take care of ourselves. We do medicate and we do help ourselves during that time. So it isn't abnormal for taking medications. Yes, what medications you take, how much you take, that is something I think it's important to discuss with a gynecologist, and also to assess if there are any other causes that can cause this kind of pain, and whether it's like, for example, things like endometriosis and all should also be ruled out before we give a complete answer to this question.
Thank you so much. I think there is a question on how on men and menstruation. I think we can take it in the second session because we are running out of time. Thanks, Jason, for putting that in the chat box. We'll definitely take it up in the next one. We've got more panelists. So I think one thing I would like to say, if you have got more questions for our panelists in this round, please type it here. What we will do is we will get in touch with them, we'll get answers, and we will post them on our Facebook page, and we'll post them so that you can get it, so that everyone is also aware of it, because we are missing some important questions. I really do not want others to miss out on the answers. So thank you so much. With that, I would give it to Purvi to take it over in the next session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you so much to all the four panelists for the lovely first half. You guys have really set the tone, and I think taking this forward We will be hearing from a lot more interesting shapers and non-shapers from in the second half of the panel. A small introduction about me. My name is Purvi Tanwani. I'm a part of Global Shapers Kolkata Hub. I'm also the co-founder of an organization called Anahat for Change Foundation in Kolkata. So quickly, I'll be introducing, I'll not take much time here. I'll be introducing all the five. I have five panelists in the second half of the session. I'll be quickly introducing them. And please also let me know if they're all here, and they can also put their videos back
Yeah,
on.
yes, we have Shubhangi.
Yeah, we have Shubhangi Rana. Shubhangi is a global shaper from Kathmandu Hub. She's also co-founder at Pat2Go, a non-profit enterprise trying to normalize menstruation and promote menstrual health and hygiene in a holistic way in Nepal. We welcome you, Shubhangi. We have Sivaranjini Ganapati, global shaper from Coimbatore, director of Amato, an organic skincare range. She's also a wellness and nutrition coach at Wellness with Sivi, with all the and with international certification. She is addressing women and college students on various forums on the topic of PCOD, PCOS, and women fertility issues. Welcome to the panel. We have Laura Restrepo here. Laura is a Colombian entrepreneur. She is the founder and CEO of Bloom Cup, a menstrual cups company that started in 2018 with the aim of improving women's quality of living through education and awareness about menstruation. Laura is here with us. Yes. We have Dr. Naeem Dalal, MD, psychiatrist, also a curator of Lusaka Hub. He's leading grassroots level change around preventive and mental health. He has a track record of impact as a youth mentor, global shaper, medical doctor, and public health chairperson of the Zambia Medical Association. So we have Mr. Dalal with us here. Last panelist of the day, we have Chine Monde Anumihe, global shaper from Lagos Hub, has years of international experience working in Africa, Europe, and United States for business, government, and NGO purposes. She's a SDG 17, which is Partnership for Development advocate with a passion for building cross-sector partnership to solve Africa's most pressing challenges. Welcome to all the lovely panelists we have. Starting with the questions, my first question would go to Laura. Laura, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Laura. How are you today? Did you like
the
first? Okay. So Laura, would you help us understand the situation in Colombia, since you're from there? You are running Bloom Cups over there. So would you help us understand the ground reality community when it comes to menstrual health and hygiene?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for opening this space. I would love to share a little bit of my country and what I've found through my business. So Colombia is a very conservative country with high gender inequality. And through my business, I've been able to get a closer look to like very difficult circumstances in which women leave their periods and are oppressed by male figures. We've found that the menstrual cup, it's a great tool for women to explore their bodies, to understand our female anatomy and our female power, and stand out for our rights. So we have this beautiful social project, which is focused on women of low income, and we bring cups to them, also with workshops about anatomy, about menstrual cycle, the use of the cup, and basically we're trying to break taboos that are very deep into our Colombian and I'll say Latin American culture in general. It's been very eye-opening experience having this experience of working with these communities and realizing that they still have so much to work around these topics. For instance, like none of the more than 1,000 women we have worked with in this project were able to explain how the menstrual cycle works and what menstruation actually is. The only thing they could say was that it was rotten blood going out of our bodies. And that was a very shocking, it's been already more than 2 years working on this. So it's very shocking to hear this perspective from women. Some of the most common myths we have heard in different communities have been like women can't cook during their period because they can separate milk or they can spoil food. They can't go close to plantations because it damages the plants, it dries them. Or they can't cut someone else's hair because it damages the hair. They even say that they couldn't have sex with men because they could get cancer, both women and men. And between some other, more myths that are, I think they're propagated not only in Colombia, but in many different countries around the world. So their stories become even more interesting when later we explain them what the menstrual cycle was and how we were trying to incentivize the idea that menstruation is not something disgusting and it's not something gross, but it's just something, natural of women's bodies. And their answer to us, which was very surprising, was like, well, we hope men don't learn about this because then we won't be able to have days without sex. This was like, clearly women are being sexually and mentally abused by their partners. And so we find very important that women start understanding their body in order to take action towards their rights. Instead of covering them with myths that are, they are just like breaking us apart inside, as like what the concept of women and what being a woman is. So it's been a great opportunity being able to learn about their stories and have deeper insights, because that motivates us to keep working very hard towards women's rights and gender equality. There is another side of it that it's this gender equality, as I was talking about. And I remember when I was in school and our sexual classes, where when we first talked about menstruation, the first thing the school did was in one room and girls in another room. And I feel this is how we start building these taboo around menstruation, where we are telling boys that they, that this is a girl's topic, that they shouldn't be involved, that it's not their concerning. When we look at the reality is that half of the population in the planet are women, and we all interact with men in a daily basis, with, as sisters, as friends, as coworkers, partners, in so many other ways. So it is key that men understand what menstrual cycles are about as well, how they happen and why. And once we all understand that women's nature is to be cyclic, then we will stop being thought of like crazy or super sensitive, irrational beings. So these are the two main things I want to share with you today. This like gender side, and then the taboos and the myths that are very deep in the Colombian culture.
Thank you, Laura. That was very insightful. We may come back to you later if we have more questions around the gender inequality that you spoke about. My
Sure.
next question would be to Sivaranjani. Sivaranjani, you're a shaper from Coimbatore, and you're also a wellness coach, and you talk about women's health with women in college and young girls. So would like to know what sort of impact does menstruation and its taboos stigma make on an adolescent or a young person's mental health or personality development? Sivaranjani, if you could answer that for us.
Siranjani, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes. Could you get my question?
Yes, I did get your question. Yeah,
Okay.
right. So let me just repeat what I told. So thank you for inviting me, and it's an honor to be a part of this, and hope everyone in Kolkata are doing good. And yeah, so being in a skincare section, I often get queries on how to address different kind of, say I have acne or I have hair thinning all of a sudden, and all these things, and there is sudden dark patches in my skin and everything. So these are the most often asked questions to me, and only later, first initially I was just into skincare. I knew nothing about how menstruation works and all these things before I got pregnant with my son. So only after that, learning a lot about how hormones work and everything, I was able to just join the dots to find out that hormones played a major role when it comes to acne, hair thinning, and everything. But then few of them were quite open to me on how this impacted their lives. Like suddenly someone would go to them and ask, okay, I have a lot of hair fall, or oh my god, you have too much acne in your face, what did you do, and all these things. And people don't understand that there is they've been already going through a little bit of depression, and they've been stressed about having acne and everything. When again people just go on rambling and rambling, okay, your skin has to be clean and all these things, which impacted them very bad. So I do get queries, a lot of queries about acne majorly. And then when I try to explain them, so you'll have to correct your diet now, and then you will have to stay away from these things, and you'll have to start impacting these things in your life, they tend to feel okay, probably this is not common. So I just want to put it out there, like we are all a women. Men sometimes they do understand us, and sometimes they don't. So let them just keep them out of the picture. But as a woman, we might know what actually goes in our body every month, and we should be a little empathetic to another person, thinking about, okay, she might be going through something, and she just needs a solution. So instead of just rambling about, okay, you got acne, you got hair thinning, and all these things, probably we can just try to understand them, and just let things as they are, and just give them a support. So just being with more than talking with more than 300 people, I mean 300 women, like in the past 5 months, since I started becoming a health coach and addressing people on menstruation and everything. So I've addressed more than 300 now, and few of them are still in contact with me on a daily basis, asking, Akka, what is this? Akka, what is this? What should I do? And everything. And one of the major reasons I became a health coach was I suffered with PCOD issues, and I had issues in getting pregnant. So I have a 7-month-old son now, but then I had to go through a lot of treatments. And only at one point of time, I understood that, okay, everything has to be done naturally. So let me quit all these medicines, which were having a very bad impact on me. And after that, I started working on diet and lifestyle and everything, and I got pregnant with my son. So infertility is not a big issue. As per the statistics, at least 2 women in 5, they tend to have at least hormone imbalances, or PCOD or PCOS. And endometriosis is very common now. 1 in 10 women have endometriosis. So I think people should be aware that, okay, this is all common now with all the toxic environment we have been surrounded, and they should try to work on something to get out of it, rather than just self-blaming them. And self-body shaming is also there. And women with PCOD, they tend to put on weight quite easily. So, and a lot of women, I mean, a lot of the queries that when I get is like, okay, I just met this person, and the first question, they may not know what to ask or what to start a conversation, and they start, okay, you put on a lot of weight. So that is how the first thing starts itself. I mean, first question starts itself. So that is again bringing a lot of stress, in turn, a lot of hormonal imbalances in their body, and it's a chain, right? It keeps on going and going and going. So I think people should be a little more empathetic, and people should be aware that of all the common factors that is available to women, like the PCOS, its side effects, and like Swarnama told, like PMS is is the new hormonal, the term used and all. So I think that we need to address, and we should make people aware that these are all common things, and they should not be blamed or body shamed for it, which can put a lot of mental stress. Is it audible?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Shivaranjani, for sharing your experience as a wellness coach. We hope you address a lot more concerns of young adults in future. Going to Shubhangi Rana. Shubhangi, you're a global shaper from Kathmandu Hub, also a co-founder of Pad2Go, a very lovely and a unique initiative that you've taken along with your other co-founder. So I would like to understand, are there policies in Nepal which looks into menstrual health in a holistic manner? Since your initiative was started in 2017, what kind of changes have you seen so far in 3 years of running Pad2Go? So if you could tell us a bit about Pad2Go, also about the policies in Nepal which looks into menstrual health in a holistic manner.
Thank you so much, Purvi. So Pad2Go is a social enterprise. We are a for-profit social enterprise. We're not an NGO. And we were established in October 2018. We promote menstrual health in a holistic way, like you did tell us. And then in order to do so, we have a threefold approach. So number one is we provide sanitary pads for sanitary napkin vending machines. And the pads that you do vend out from these machines are cheaper than MRP because we've collaborated with both Nepal-made pads as well as imported pads. So, ensuring affordability as well as accessibility during an emergency. So number two is that we also have interactive sessions with both boys and girls in schools and colleges. So something that I realized along the way is that, these young boys were never given an opportunity to talk about menstruation. And this ignorance itself has caused a sense of awkwardness among themselves, and which again does lead up to a greater stigma. So biologically speaking, yes, you can say, menstruation is a menstruating individual's issue. But again, our society, our culture, and we ourselves have taken this issue to such an extent that now it has become the society's issue. So number three is being a social enterprise. 10% profit from our machines and all the profit from the pads are given back to the society. So for the year 2018-2019, we're constructing toilets in rural parts of Nepal. So these toilets are both female as well as disability friendly. So something that we realized along the way while working in the field is that, in Nepal, the female literacy rate is really low, especially in the rural areas. And one of the main reasons is because of the high number of girls dropping out of school. And the reason for these girls dropping out of school is lack of sanitary facilities and products in these schools. So some schools don't have toilets, and if some schools do have toilets, they don't have separate toilets. And if they do have separate toilets, they don't have water facilities, due to which during their menstruation, girls miss 4 to 5 days of school. And then rather than missing 4 to 5 days of school, they just drop out of school altogether because their parents think it's better for them to help the family at home or in the agricultural fields. So this has become a very vicious cycle in Nepal, and Pad2Go is working towards breaking this vicious cycle itself. Coming back to the second question, that is the policies the government of Nepal is taking forward. So in Nepal, we're not looking at menstruation in a very holistic manner, to be honest, because, being a patriarchal society, again, it is difficult for men, especially in the older generation, to realize how important it is for them to be a part of this. I think the younger generation are more open to these ideas. And when you're young, you're obviously more open to ideas and to learning new things, right? But then I think the older generations are more stringent and rigid and aren't looking at it in a more holistic manner. But again, we do have a Menstrual Hygiene Management Alliance in Nepal. So this alliance is more built of INGOs, NGOs, and social enterprises, as well as suppliers and dealers of sanitary pads and other products. So we ourselves are going forward and, talking to the government and trying to change policies. So as of now, pads and sanitary products are still not an essential item for the government right now during the COVID situation, because even in Nepal, we have a lockdown right now. And that has become a very big issue because, periods don't stop during pandemics, and we have been talking to the government in that aspect. But again, our financial the statement has just come for the year 2020, and even in this statement, the government has told us that they will be providing free sanitary pads for all the girls in government schools. But again, only provision of pads is not enough, because you need to look at this in a more holistic manner, because even in Nepal, there are taboos, like common taboos like not entering the kitchen or not entering the temple, and very, very rare taboos and extreme taboos like not being kept outside in cow sheds. So that's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shubhangi, for sharing the policies that are implemented in Nepal, and great work that you guys are doing. Okay, so I'll be going to Dr. Naeem Dalal now. Yeah. So Dr. Naeem Dalal is the curator of the Lusaka Hub, and he is also leading a project on mental health. So my question to you, doctor, would be what sort of impact does menstruation and its taboos and stigma has on a young person's mind, on mental health and personality development?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very grateful to be part of this panel. The first thing that I'll say is I'm the odd one out right now, and I'm going to ask a few questions as I continue with my talk. There's always that thing that women are subjected to, and young girls as well, and that's this. I don't know if everyone can see it, and this comes with, oh, it's that time of the month, and then what's that supposed to mean, and why is it that that's such a cliche that is used all over the world? It's not just in developed countries, but also in developing countries like my country here in Zambia. As you very well put it, taboos, everyone has said that taboos are very, very openly shared, but yet talking about menstruation is something that's not being shared. The previous speaker alluded to earlier that young boys and adolescents are more open to talking about menstruation. Reason being is as they grow up, they just kind of fit into this toxic community and conversation around menstruation being something that's not being spoken about. As you rightfully put it, I'm a psychiatrist registrar, but at the same time, I'm the global shaper from the Lusaka Hub, and we have a project called Menstruation Matters. And we also have a separate project called Mental Health and the Birdie Project, where we empower preventive mental health. So what we found that in a country like ours, where majority of health is based on culture and beliefs, there's also that element of talking about it holistically, as everyone speaks about. Let's talk about the biology and find out what the risks are, and let's also talk about what the culture is and what people's beliefs are. Having said that, what I found with the Menstruation Matters project was, what we do is we go out in communities, we talk to the girl child, because the girl child misses 4 to 5 days on an average in a month of school, and they're also made to do extra chores back home. So all that kind of makes it very overwhelming, and there's a lot of dropouts from the girl child in the school setup. And then, as if that's not enough, culture and belief come in, and once they reach of age, they're married off, so early childhood marriages, all has to do around the menstruation. And this is something that is being taught, and it's passed out down through generation, through word of mouth. So how do you break that? So then the question comes in, is there a right way to talk about menstruation? And that's a topic that's something that no one wants to talk about, because they feel overwhelmed, not just the boy child, but also the girl child. Then there is that question, is there a right way for men to talk about periods? Okay. And then now the question is taboo busting, like breaking the taboos. Who should do it? Should it just be women? Should it be men as well? These are questions that are really being zoned in on. And this is what we do with the Lusaka Hub project, where we're trying to navigate the understanding of what all the children understand. Now, here's what I have found out from these outreaches that I've done on the grassroots. Men are welcome, and the boy child really wants to understand what menstruation is and what periods are. Because when we talk about, and I'm going to take an example from my practice in clinical practice, when you talk about breasts, and breast cancer, again, that's a topic that a lot of people are not comfortable talking about. Because, when you're talking about breast cancer, you're desexualizing the breast, the women breast. For men and everyone else, they're all going to talk about the breast in a sexualized context. And when you're going to talk about it, breast cancer, it takes that away from them. So they don't want to talk about it. Let's now go to procreation. Let's talk about breastfeeding. I'm sure many men and many people, even women, are not comfortable with other women breastfeeding in public. Yes, there is culture. Yes, there is religion. Yes, there are beliefs. But then at the same time, what's the core thing that really kind of triggers people? It's the fact that you're taking away what people have grown up and what people believe the breast is supposed to be, sexual in nature. So same thing, coming to menstruation, which organ of the body actually goes through that process of, bleeding and losing blood? It's the vagina. And whenever people talk about the vagina, especially for the male child and the boys, it's always just thinking about it on a sexual context. And that is how it comes in with the male mental health and well-being, and even for the women. At that age, when you're reaching puberty, there's all these urges, the sexual urges that come in, and people just want to talk about it in a sexual way and sexualize it, but not talk about what functions that particular organ has. So again, let's talk about it. We as the Lusaka Hub also talk about it as sexual and reproductive health rights. We talk about it in that sense, because from my practice, what I found is when I started out as a junior doctor, and when I was rotating through my obstetrics and gynecology, a lot of young girls come in having fallen pregnant because of their sexual urges. But then here I said there, you see how I didn't say the boy involved in that sexual urge as well? No one talks about the boy child. It's just a girl child that has to go through the whole process of labor and comes in to deliver, and all that just ends up with the girl child. And when you sit down with these boys, these adolescents, they'll say, we didn't know that, having sex will lead to pregnancy, and it has to do with the periods and the cycle. So again, that comes to the point that we need to start talking about these things early on and introducing it. Otherwise, we are going to always have this concept of it being gross, it being something we don't want to talk about, and it just making, having negative views of a woman's body when we talk about the menstruation and the period and the taboo that it comes with. And it also plays with the mental health and well-being. If what I've actually found in my practice, actually, we're talking about menstruation matters and mental health. Did you know that even guys, male youth actually get overwhelmed, and it also affects their mental well-being when they don't know a lot about the woman's body? I have had so many youth come to me in my practice telling me that I didn't know that menstruation is so gross and it turns me off. And I can't find that, the pleasure that I had, and I when I was feeling so attached to this person, I don't find her that much more attractive anymore because I found out about it. It's actually also affecting the male youth because they are not being introduced to all this. All right. And it all plays like this vicious cycle. So we need to start talking about it. And it's not just talking about it from, the amazing things, because I can't come here and start talking about, despite the fact that I have read, despite the fact that I do practice it in my clinic, I can't come talk about what women experience when it comes to menstruations, because that's not what I can relate to as a male. But I can talk about it as a perspective on what I understand and how I'm supposed to understand it. All right. So now the other question comes in to say, why should men talk about menstruation, and why is it not just a mental health, and menstruation is not just a women's thing to speak about? And I will say it issue because, again, I find that very irritating. It's not an issue. It's a public health concern. All right. It's a health concern. Because I can actually give you examples of so many men that have come through that in gynecology, where you know, in their practice, when I was practicing, they would come through and they've lost, you know, the couple has lost their child, you know, there's an abortion that's taken place, you know, everyone would start asking to say, I didn't know that I was going to get pregnant with, well, and you know, I wish I knew that this was the time when she's fertile, and you know, I lost this child and I feel so guilty. So all these things, it's something that needs to be discussed from a perspective. And this is why with the Lusaka Hub project, we talk about menstruation matters, and it's okay to discuss about it. We also talk about properly naming and talking about it without name calling. And also, you know, it's very awkward for the adolescents, the males, as well as the young girls. But the thing is, the more we talk about it, the more it becomes less, you know, awkward for the young ones, as well as all of us. And, you know, for the girl child, this is what we tell them to, you know, try to break the taboo and the beliefs and the culture. You know, we are living in this generation where the girl child needs to talk about it. You know, everyone wants the girl child to be, you know, ambitious and, you know, lead for impact. But then we're not teaching the boy child to learn and work with an ambitious girl child. So what we tell the girl child is, you know, boldly hold your tampon in your hand when you go to the bathroom, wherever you are. If you do have it, don't hide it. All right. Secondly, speak up when someone uses inappropriate or demeaning languages. All right. Don't just let it be. Talk about it. And finally, support each other. You know, talk about it, break down stereotypes, and talk about it at an early age. And one thing we do is we actually don't give out tampons to the girls. We actually give out tampons to the boys. And we remind them to say, you have mothers, you have sisters, you have friends who are going through a lot, and they're going through the most at that time of the month. All right. So instead of saying, you know, it's that time of the month, instead of doing this, move around with the tampon and give it to that person who needs it at that time of the month. And let's just start talking about it. And one thing, the other thing why I am so open and ambitious and passionate about this topic, it's not just because I'm a doctor and I'm in practice and I know it's a public health concern. You know, all these things for me is you know, is part of my practice. But then the fact that, guys, majority of the people who are making these decisions, legal reforms, they're all men. And these are the same men who feel disgusted and intimidated. And when they think of the period and menstruation, they think of it as, you know, it turns them off. All right. So we need to change, and we need to keep pushing, and we need men to come up. So to answer my questions, is there a right way to talk about menstruation? Yes. Here's an amazing webinar that you guys have put together, and this is the best way to talk about it. And secondly, is there a right way for men to talk about periods? Yes. I just gave you examples of how to go talk about it. I mean, we all know we have that person in our lives who is going through that, and we need to talk about it. And finally, taboo busting, who should do it? Everyone. Like literally everyone has to do it. And this is why let's keep doing what you're doing. And I'm so grateful to be part of this platform, and I'm so happy to have learned so much from the previous speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naeem, for sharing about the two beautiful projects that Lusaka Hub is running. And I feel both the projects are trying to normalize menstruation and amongst the menstruators as well as the non-menstruators, which is great, which is really good. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Thanks a lot. So we have the last panelist here. We have Chiney Monde Anumihe, who's a shaper from the Lagos Hub. And she has worked extensively in Africa, Europe, and United States for business, government, and non-government purposes. So from Chiney, we would like to understand, since she has worked so much in Africa, we would like to understand the ground reality in the community over there when it comes to mental health. And secondly, we would also try to understand what are the what impact does menstruation, the stigma and the taboos related to it has on the mental health, personality development of young person in Africa. If Chiney could throw some light upon it.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for all of the speakers, the panelists that have contributed. It's been very important and fruitful conversation. I've learned quite a bit. in the last couple of hours that I've been here. So as Dr. Naeem has already kind of spoken a bit to some of the challenges plaguing the region, period poverty gets less attention in a country like Nigeria for many reasons, but the number one reason being it's just uncomfortable for people to talk about. It has been estimated by UNICEF that 1 in 10 girls misses school during their periods in Africa. And in Nigeria, it's been revealed that girls make up about 60% of the over 11 million children out of school. So that's more than half of children out of school are women or young girls. So I would say that one of the major challenges that we have in Nigeria and Lagos specifically as well is affordability of menstrual pads. They're expensive, they're highly taxed, which makes them less affordable and less accessible, especially for girls, women and girls living in more marginalized communities. So there has been a petition to the National Assembly to pass something called the Menstrual Hygiene Bill, which is pretty much to remove the VAT, value-added tax on pads to make them more affordable. But our representatives are predominantly men, and they've been very lukewarm on the topic. I don't even think lukewarm is a strong enough word. They've been nonchalant and indifferent and uninterested on the topic. In terms of the way it has affected, let me just speak to what we have as a hub have done. So the Global Shapers Lagos Hub has taken this access to menstrual products and also menstruation information quite seriously, because our population is the largest in Nigeria. We have 21 million people in the state of Lagos. So we have sort of joined the End Period Poverty campaign through our hub, and actually the campaign has been going on for about 4 years now. So what we have done is we've solicited donations from the public and also from Shapers. We've partnered with organizations such as Moped Nigeria, and we have raised enough money and received donations enough to provide sanitary pads, menstruation products for about a little bit over 200 young girls. And the good thing is that they've been very receptive to our donations. I say that because one thing that has been a challenge in Nigeria is trust. And by that, I mean our politicians have come into marginalized communities, taken pictures of them, and disappeared. So us trying to come in, with all our good intentions, you might not be received very well. So what we've had to do is build trust over the last 4 years so that what we are donating to them or what we're giving to them is well received and also valued. If someone doesn't trust you, what you tell them, it's not going to hold any weight or hold any value. So we have really built a good rapport and a good relationship with some of the most under-resourced communities in Lagos, specifically the Lagos Island community, where we have been able to reach out to the young girls. And we have really faced some cultural challenges. This particular community, I attended a leadership summit a few years ago, and there were boys and girls in the room, secondary school students, but the girls did not speak at all throughout the entire summit. And afterwards, what some of the girls came up to me and said, we are afraid to speak when men are in the room. So if not that we had taken the time to sort of speak to them one-on-one, we would have never known what their challenges are, or we would have never understood the cultural or religious or sensitivity, things that we need to be very, very cognizant and aware of. So I think there are several challenges that we have faced, and one of them really is cultural sensitivities. I think it's also important to mention that, of course, the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, has made affordability, accessibility to sanitary products more difficult. There's this emphasis on cleanliness and sanitizing and all of that in communities where you don't have access to toilet facilities, where you don't have access to clean water, you don't have access to water, period. How do you expect some of these women and girls to manage their menstrual cycle? So what we've had also to do is really try and run sensitization campaigns and express to them that, we understand your challenges. And if you do have access to these facilities, this is how to manage your menstrual cycle during this time. We've also run into the taboo of how do we introduce a more sustainable model? Because sanitary pads are disposable, the traditional sanitary pads, or the conventional ones that we're more familiar with now. We have tried to really understand, how do we address the taboo of, not really taboo, but how do we resensitize people to using cloth pads, for example, reusable, washable cloth pads, because as at now, we've also faced a challenge with some of the mothers not wanting our daughters to receive our donations because they can't sustain it. So if you get Always or Moped or whatever sanitary pads for these few months, afterwards, what happens? The mother now has to find a way to continue or to sustain that pattern. So there have been times where mothers have been like, no, we don't want, because I can't pay for that after you guys leave. And so that's pretty much why we've really tried to think, how do we resensitize people to know that cloth pads are an option? Cloth pads can be sanitized, can be washed and reused. And menstrual cups is a very new concept for many of us in Nigeria, especially Lagos. So you're fighting with the taboo that says inserting something into your vagina is you losing your virginity. How do you explain to someone that has that mentality that menstrual cups or something that's more sustainable than disposable pads is an option? So those are the challenges that I know that they're similar all across the world, but I've really gained quite a lot of knowledge on this conversation with you guys. In terms of recommendations, absolutely, as Dr. Naeem mentioned, break the silence. Men and boys should be part of these conversations. It shouldn't just be women only, because women or girls should not have to bear the burden by ourselves. This is a natural human occurrence, and you are part of the problem, in the sense that the stigma that is being imposed on us when we're menstruating is what's causing these girls to not attend school. They don't want the boys to laugh at them because they're using newspapers and cotton wool and tissue paper, and they're bleeding through their garments. So if you understand what I'm going through, then you're easing the burden, and I don't have to deal with the stigma. I don't have to deal with the feeling of being unclean or dirty or anything like that. So it's important to include men, women, boys, and girls in this conversation. Education is really key in this matter. We also have, at the policy level, let's just say government has made condoms free and readily available, but they do not make pads free and readily available. Sex is a voluntary act, menstruation is not. You have absolutely no choice, really, as a woman, as a girl, whether you're going to menstruate or not, versus condoms, voluntary act. It's really ridiculous. So I think there really just has to be more collaboration in terms of NGOs and individuals that are working in this space in Nigeria to get the attention of our legislators to ensure that menstrual hygiene products, sanitary products, are more affordable and more accessible, if not entirely free. So also recommend that governments, menstrual product companies, and all stakeholders make pads accessible to women and girls in rural communities and also suburban communities. I'm in Lagos, which is the most urban state in Nigeria. What about those in Nasarawa? What about those in Imo State? What about those in areas where you have to walk several kilometers to get to a pharmacy or to get to a convenience mart where you can purchase your sanitary products? So they need to have some sort of monitoring to make sure that they're available to those communities that are more forgotten. And lastly, I would love to see some sort of cubicle or some sort of toilet facility everywhere in schools, privately for schools, and also just outside where it's exclusively for people to change their sanitary napkin or whatever product that they're using. A safe space, private, because again, when you don't have toilets, where is she going to feel safe to be able to change her menstrual product and manage her menstrual cycle? So I think we've pretty much already touched on all of these, and these all flow into, as you guys have already mentioned, flow into how we perceive ourselves, how we regard ourselves. And if we don't have high self-esteem or perception, it affects every other aspect of our lives. So women aren't able to fully, or young girls aren't able to fully, to reach their full potential when they don't feel part of the society, when they have to exclude themselves because of the challenges that they face, and also when they feel that the world or their male counterparts are at an advantage because every month I have to deal with this. Every month I'm bleeding. You know what? I'm just gonna not try. I'm not gonna show up for school. I'm not gonna. You can imagine how much a girl is missing out on when she feels like I should not be part of this because of what's happening to me and I have no control over it. So that's pretty much my contribution. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Hine. Thank you for sharing all the challenges that the hub has been facing. We could relate a lot because some of the challenges that you mentioned, we're facing that in India as well. And you said a line which made a lot of sense to me. Sex is a voluntary act, menstruation is not. And why should only condoms be free? Why shouldn't menstrual products be free? So we totally stand for that. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Okay, so Mayuri, do we have questions for this part of this session?
For this one, I think Naeem answered a question from the previous round, which was about how can male be champions in period journey of the female menstruators. So I think Naeem, by being here, I think he answered the question very well. So I was just wondering, about Naeem has answered. I wanted to know what the reception of sustainable menstrual health products such as cups or reusable products in Nepal and Colombia and India. So if our panelists from those countries, if they could jump in. Yes, Shubhangi, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just writing down the answer. So anyway, in Nepal, all these products are not regarded equally because of the social taboos around it. So during menstruation in Nepal, we're not allowed to enter the kitchen, and a menstrual cup needs to be boiled, right? Due to which, in order to sterilize it, due to which menstrual cups are very restricted to urban areas where girls and women are, questioning these norms and are able to question these norms and buy menstrual cups. Similarly, for tampons, a lot of women and family members themselves feel that these tampons break virginity, due to which tampons again are a problem, especially in the rural areas. And then in the rural areas, this whole idea of reusable pads are coming up, right? The cloth pads. So when we did discuss about the cloth pads with the girls and women in the rural areas, what they told us is that for so many of them, because some of the menstrual taboos are also very culturally related, especially in the Hindu society, we worship the sun god. So these cloth pads, they wash it and they cannot put it under the sun, due to which they have to use the damp cloth again. So that again does create a lot of problems as well as different infections. So there are a lot of issues regarding the use of sustainable products just because of social taboos around it in Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have Laura who has her hands up. She would you answer the question?
Yeah. So I'm going to speak about menstrual cups because that's my field. And so obviously it hasn't been easy. Like there's a lot of education that has to go before that. And as a lot of you were mentioning, there is this issue where like even you explain the girls and like they get super excited about the cup, then they get home and their mothers tell them like, no, you can't use that because you're going to lose your virginity, or like it's going to give you some kind of infection. So in that regard, it hasn't been easy. It's been a big challenge, but at the same time, it's been very interesting to find ways of involving schools and involving families into all this conversation, because we've come to realize that it's an issue that we have to involve all this other agents around them. It's like an entire community. We don't want to be disruptive. We don't want to go into a community and just like tell them like, oh, look, this is a new product that it's much better than what you have been using. But it's more about showing them a new perspective, a new option, and it's up to them to take it or not. But we need to have that support from parents and school in order for it to work. So obviously it's a big challenge, but I think it's working. And every day there's more. I feel it's like a trend. It's becoming a bit trendy, the menstrual cup thing. And once a woman uses it and like it, then she shares with her friends, with her family, how her experience has been better. And that's how it starts changing. So I say it's like a snowball. It starts growing and growing every day. So I think we're going through a good path. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, the country in Colombia, tampons and pads, they were removed, the VAT tax, since 2018. But unfortunately, cups and all the sustainable products were not included in that category because they say that it's like the argument of the government is that they are a privileged product, which sounds a bit, like it's not very coherent, having in mind that it could help the environment, it could help them economically, but whatever. We are working on that regard through a collective, menstruation rights collective, it's called, and several people working around the sustainable product industry. We're working together to address these topics with the government and hopefully get some support in that regard.
Thank you so much, Laura. I think we have Swarnima. If you want to quickly jump in with the input, you're happy to hear.
Quickly, I'll just say something, and I'm glad Laura spoke about the privilege issue. Yesterday, there was a very reputed organization in India that was having this discussion about a sustainable menstruation, for the privileged. And I feel that this is a very strange framing of the issue because it is not about privilege at all. In fact, we so easily dismiss the experiences of many women in under-resourced communities who use disposable cloth in a very sanitary manner also. So more than an issue of privilege or not a privilege, I feel it is a question of, what context, allows which product. I think that is what we should be very sensitive about. If any intervention says, this product is the absolute best, I feel that there is no such concept right now because every menstruation is different and every menstrual product has to be tailored to the context of the woman. So privilege or not privilege is a very misleading question. Because, we also see that in so many cases, especially in India, we see that the government is giving out free sanitary napkins. And many a time they are so small or they are so few that women are, reusing it again and again. And even though that is considered as a cleaner alternative to cloth, the way it is being used is so unclean. So I think the conversation has to move towards safe and sanitary practices and looking at menstrual products which suit a particular context, whether it is privileged or unprivileged. Yes, privileged women have more time and space and resources to, experiment of their own accord. But categorizing a product as privileged or unprivileged is a very, erroneous way of framing the question of access to choice and access to the right and, the sanitary menstrual product. So yeah, that's what I want.
Thank you, Swarnima. I think that's it. That's all we have. And there were a couple of spillover questions from the previous one, but now we are pressed for time. What I have mentioned earlier is that we will be taking all the inputs from our speakers in the first round, and we will be sharing them on our Facebook page. I'll share the link of our Facebook page again. Please follow the page, and we will be making posts on them in the following days. That's it from me. Yeah, Purvi?
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot to all the panelists. All the 9 panelists we've had. It has been a great session and it's over 1 hour, 30 minutes, which is way past the time that we had decided. Thank you so much for joining us. And we would surely, as Mayuri said, give you all the inputs from the first session on our Facebook page.
Thank you. And we end our session here. Yeah, sure, Jason. We'll tag you. Thank you so much for joining.